Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Madeline Burke. I'm the Director of Content for Seed World Group, and I am delighted to be your host today. With me today is Dr. Scott Denning. Scott is a climate scientist and professor of atmospheric science at Colorado State University. Scott, thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So we typically on this show have a larger panel where we've got 2 or maybe 3 guests. I decided to invite just you today because the topic that we are going to dig into is quite a big one. I first crossed paths with you when I happened to click on a presentation you had done called Climate Change: Simple, Serious, and Solvable. And I have to tell you that you made very, very complex science amazingly accessible. And maybe more important than that, I left feeling inspired and hopeful, which is not always how we feel when we're talking about climate change.
Sure.
So I'm going to put at the bottom of our screen a link to that presentation. I highly recommend it. So there's so much I'd like to chat with you about today that relates specifically to the seed industry, but I'm wondering if we can start off sort of by framing our conversation with a short summary. I don't know if you can squeeze that hour and 15-minute presentation into about 3 minutes. Could you tell us what people need to know about climate change right now?
Sure. I like to talk about the 3 S's of climate change: simple, serious, and solvable. So simple is how does it work? Serious is why is it bad? And solvable is what are we going to do about it? It's kind of odd that, I've spent 35 years working on this. If it's so simple, how come I still have a job? But the real nut of climate change is that when you put more heat into something than you take out, it warms up. Right. So there's more heat coming in from the sun than is being radiated out to space. That heat accumulates in the Earth system and warms us up. So it's really not rocket science, not something you need a PhD in. Everybody knows from like putting a pan of water on the stove. If you put more heat into it than comes out, it warms up. So really the simple part is just tracking the heat in and out of the Earth. Serious, it doesn't have to be terribly serious, but it is. If we don't fix this, the problem will grow and grow and grow until it becomes the biggest problem in the world. And goodness knows, we got lots of other problems in the world. So it's really saying something for having to have it be worse than all that. Ultimately, the heat from CO2 builds up and it doesn't go away. The warming will get worse and worse until we stop making it worse, and then it won't get better. So we have to stop adding CO2 to the atmosphere and making it hotter and hotter and hotter, because otherwise we have, droughts and floods and fires and famines, and we just can't deal with that. So the serious part is unfortunately deadly serious. Solvable. What are we going to do about this problem? We're going to stop setting carbon on fire. We're going to stop using coal, oil, and gas to fuel the world economy, because every bit of carbon that we ever burn adds permanently to the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that warms up the world. Sooner or later, we're going to stop burning carbon. The question is, how far are we going to go along that road before we stop making it worse? And of course, stop burning carbon means we have to provide energy in other ways. So we're going to need a lot of solar and wind and hydro and geothermal and nuclear and better grids and better storage and better vehicles and all that stuff in order that we can live well without burning carbon and setting carbon on fire. So simple, serious, and solvable.
But truly, truly solvable.
Yeah. So if you want to poke at that a little bit, so it will cost money, of course, to rebuild the world energy system. Economists estimate something on the order of 1 or 2% of the world economy. So this is a lot. This is trillions and trillions of dollars. Less than we currently spend on cars, but more than we currently. It's a lot, but it's that we do. In our generation, we put $3,000 computers on desks across the world every 3 years, my entire adult life. That cost trillions and trillions of dollars. We built the internet. We replaced all the landline phones in the world with cell phones. None of these things wrecked the world economy. They actually are the world economy. Our kids are going to wind up replacing old creaky energy systems with energy systems that work for them, that make their lives better. And that's going to generate all of the prosperity in their generation, just as our big infrastructure investments did in our generation.
Okay, so the climate change discussion obviously impacts every industry, sort of every facet of life, and different industries are tackling it in different ways. The seed industry in particular, or specifically, has been making a lot of important steps forward and investing in a number of climate smart technologies, breeding crops that use resources more efficiently, in some cases that offer climate benefits like carbon capture. Can you speak to the seed industry's role in climate change mitigation?
Sure. So, the seed industry is a little wedge of agriculture writ large, right? So, you guys feed us. We need you. We really appreciate your efforts. Everybody on Earth needs to eat. So, as the world has warmed, the energy balance of the surface changes. There's more evaporation from the soil. So we need a sort of water smart agriculture. The growing seasons have changed. Spring comes earlier, fall comes later. First frost is later than it was. So crops are needing to adjust to these changes in the seasons. There's less snow accumulation on the surface during the winter months, so you have less of a big flush of snowmelt into the soil in the early spring during planting season, and all of these things require different plant genetics. So, in addition to that, I know that seed companies and seed scientists are working on different ways to deal with pests, different ways to deal with weeds, different balances between like C3 weeds and C4 crops and things like that, that are incredible innovations in how farmers and agriculture in general can adjust to changes in the environment. We think about the higher CO2 in the atmosphere favoring C3 plants over C4 plants. So wheat over C4 weeds, or C3 weeds over corn, and things like that. So there's a lot, I think, going on in your industry that is responsive to changing climate, and also kind of leading the way in how agriculture can adjust to changes in the world.
So let me kind of add on to that with a maybe a hard political question. We within the seed industry certainly see that and know that and celebrate the big investment that is happening. And agriculture as a whole really has made very big steps forward compared to where we were even 10 years ago. Yet agriculture and the seed industry as a sector within that often has fingers pointed at it for its role in climate change. It seems that, I don't want to use the word vilification, but almost, which the industry feels is sometimes unfairly placed, turns some in agriculture away from supporting climate change mitigation policy and efforts. How would you feel that we as an industry could maybe navigate that?
Yeah, what an interesting question. So let's just unpack that a little bit. People talk about the impact of agriculture on climate change. And if you sort of add up all of the greenhouse gas emissions across different sectors, far and away, I mean, between 75 and 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions is from the energy industry, not the ag industry. So if you feel a little vilified, just think how the energy industry feels about it. So on the other hand, when we take ag, it depends what you count, how much of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world are from agriculture. Certainly the biggest fraction of that is the burning of fossil fuel in agriculture. So, we need energy to drive our machinery. We need energy to transport crops to market. We need energy to plow the fields and spread the fertilizer and all that kind of stuff. And that energy is probably around half of the greenhouse gas emissions of the ag industry. So as energy gets decarbonized, those emissions will go away, just like the electric power industry. As everything starts running on clean electricity, farm equipment will be running on clean electricity and not on diesel fuel anymore, say 20 years from now. So that's a shrinking problem, and it isn't really ag's problem to solve. This is a problem that's part of the overall, fossil fuel problem. Another big chunk of that is globally is deforestation to make room for croplands, right? So tropical deforestation to make pastures and soybeans and so forth in tropical countries like Brazil or Indonesia. That's not a seed industry problem. That's a deforestation in Brazil problem. And it's not really up to the seed industry to fix that. But that's another huge part of that pie, right? Remember, the big part of the pie is not you guys, it's energy. There's an energy part of the ag pie, and then there's this deforestation part. And what's left is actually rather small. And it has more to do with animal agriculture than it does with seed agriculture. So cattle are ruminants, and they emit methane. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas with a fairly short lifetime. And there's work going on in the cattle industry to change nutrition, animal nutrition, trying to reduce methane emissions. There's also concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, feedlots, where literally millions of animals are raised in very small areas that produce a lot of manure, and that has ammonia and methane and N2O. So there's a lot going on in what you might think of as the agriculture sector for emissions. But out of all of that, very little of it is actually seeds and crops. Much more of it is these other kinds of agricultural activities that I can't imagine the seed industry really feeling too terribly under the gun about. Honestly, plant-based cropping does emit some CO2, some N2O. Much of that, I think, is being addressed, and you could probably tell me more about this, through precision agriculture. For example, use of drones and airborne sensors that measure in very high resolution the fertility of the soil, the production of the crops. Where does the irrigation water have to go? Where does the fertilizer have to go? Where does the pesticide have to go? That kind of work dramatically reduces the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. So I think if people are saying ag is the problem, they're kind of narrow-minded. And if you listen to what's really going on in 21st century agriculture, there's a lot of work being done to address what is actually a fairly small part of the overall climate greenhouse gas pie.
Makes so much sense. Okay, so let me give you a sneak peek behind the scenes of what I do in terms of the communicating out to the seed industry. We find that we track readership of the different articles that we write and that we bring to the industry. Content keywords that include things like climate, to be honest, as a big topic, sustainability, tend not to drive the biggest readership. And so when we are looking at writing headlines and that kind of thing, we would typically almost steer away from those words. And my question for you is, do you think that comes from a place of people feeling exhausted or daunted, or where are the feelings, and how does the seed industry perhaps counteract that fatigue?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I guess you're not alone. That when headlines talk about climate problems or climate crises, there are a lot of people who just sort of skip to the next article. You're probably not the only people in the world who are doing that. I kind of feel like a lot of the problem is a sense of fear and a sense of helplessness, that people feel like there's nothing they can do about this problem, that we've been sort of handed this problem and they don't know what to do. And it doesn't help when articles, like you say, are just sort of hammering away on this middle S, right? The middle S of the simple, serious, and solvable is serious. You could call it scary, right? The scary stories. If there's not a solution being offered, of course that makes people feel a lack of agency, a lack of the ability to do anything about it. So I try to emphasize solutions, decarbonization, clean energy. There are opportunities. If you think of climate change as an opportunity rather than just a problem, this is a problem that everybody winds up having a part in solving, right? All of us use energy. All of us buy stuff that is made with energy. And your industry in particular is selling products and services that are helpful in solving this problem. So maybe if you reframe your headlines, your titles of your articles around opportunities for solutions or innovation and rising to the challenge, to give people a sense that they can be part of a solution rather than just part of a problem, you'll get better readership. What do they say? You catch more with honey than vinegar, or something like that.
Absolutely, and that is something I think that the whole industry is looking at. And I suppose if I even took a step back from the climate change discussion, what I find really fascinating about how you have invested a lot of time into educating people is that this has become a politicized topic, but you are not choosing to only speak to one side of the discussion. You've gone and spoken at the Heartland Institute, and you've spoken to people whose starting place might be different than yours. And I feel like the seed industry has multiple topics where we are talking to a larger audience, whether that's consumers, whether that is policymakers, whether that's the general public, so our role in sustainability would certainly be one, our role in climate change, but also things like GMOs, new breeding techniques, agrochemical application. There's so many topics like this where it feels there's a big disconnect between sort of our starting place and the people we are trying to speak to. Do you have advice for the seed industry on communicating effectively? So when you go into a room where you know people basically are starting out disagreeing with you, how do you connect?
Well, so there are certainly people who know more about this than I do. I talk about climate change, and I'm a scientist. I'm not a PR guy or a communication specialist. But the advice that I was given that seems to work for me, which I hope is pretty generic, is speak as a human being first, right? Yes, I'm an expert, but I am not just talking to you as some, credentialed expert. I try to use plain language. I try to connect to people on an emotional level. I use a little humor in my presentations. I'm authentic. I'm honest. I'm who I really am when I'm talking to people, even if those people may initially perceive me to be hostile or the enemy, right? I don't know if your listeners know, Heartland Institute is a political lobby group that fights tooth and nail against decarbonization, climate action. And they've had me 3 times to talk to their group because I'm fun. I get up in front of them and I tell jokes, and I'm self-deprecating, and I try to connect to them on a human level. I try not to use a lot of insider jargon. When you talk to your people, your seed people, you use words like GMOs or agrochemicals and so forth, and that's fine. But if you're trying to reach beyond your friends out into parts of the readership that might not be on board with those concepts, maybe you use simpler language like plant breeding or I don't know, innovative agriculture. You think outside the box in terms of not just using a bunch of acronyms and jargon that's special to your field. That goes a long way. I use a lot of pictures. I talk with my hands. I don't know. I think all of these things are useful. Maybe most importantly, I start from a presumption that people mean well, and that the people on the other side of the lectern or whatever are not evil, and that we have an opportunity to connect and talk as people, that people kind of at their core mean well, and that seems to go a long way towards building trust.
Absolutely. So it does seem like there is more and more polarization in our world in general, certainly in the political sphere. What's your feeling in terms of climate change? Do you feel that there is more of a coming together, or are we going to be tackling this politicization over the longer term?
Well, certainly a lot of things are politically polarized in our country and beyond. I've been doing this for a long time, and my experience in the last decade or so has actually been that audiences are less inclined to say, oh, climate change is a hoax, it's a bunch of crap, you're just trying to take away my car. I used to have that kind of reaction fairly often, but I think things are changing for the better, at least around climate change. I think that certainly among students, now, I'm a college professor, so I'm talking with 20-year-olds a lot more than I'm talking with 50-year-olds. It's almost gone the other way. I'm finding college students now are completely convinced that there's a problem, And the trouble is not so much that they don't believe that. The trouble is that they believe that there's nothing they can do about it. And so I'm trying to meet them where they are. Try to imagine for a minute who a 20-year-old coming into college is nowadays. In the middle of high school, they suddenly were locked into their houses for 2 years in the COVID pandemic. So they're kind of traumatized, and they've kind of lost an opportunity to socialize and learn how to interact with people when they were adolescents. This is a different group than it was, say, 10 years ago. Now, you're not primarily talking with college students. You're primarily talking, I guess, with people who buy seeds, right? So, or who sell seeds.
And the whole seed value chain, yeah.
Yeah, the value chain. So that's probably grown-ups. I'm just guessing, right? Not 20-year-old. But even with people my age, I'm 64. There are public opinion polls that are run constantly now that maybe you should look into this. The Yale climate maps. Yale University runs this big public opinion polling research. The U.S. population has moved a long way in 10 years on this issue. There's something like 8% of the U.S. population that is dismissive about climate change, who say, no, that's no problem. That's just a bunch of crackpot egghead scientists who think that. That is a tiny minority opinion. That is not really a going concern. There's a whole bunch of people in the middle, and those are the people I want to talk to. You got people way off on the other end that are like, oh no, it's the end of the world, nothing you can do to stop it, and people on this end that think that it's a hoax or it's a conspiracy. I'm not going to make much difference with those people. But you got something like 70% of the population that's on shades of gray in the middle. And I think those people are reachable. I think pretty much everybody knows that things are changing. Seasons are changing. Droughts are changing. Farm productivity is changing. I think people are hungry to hear about what we might do about this problem, and not just want to cry in their beer about how bad it is. I think we want to talk to those people in the middle. And I'm optimistic that we can overcome some of that political polarization by trusting each other, by talking to each other, by like we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, and finding the common ground on all of these big, huge topics that we have to kind of muddle our way through in some way. One of probably the thing that resonated the most with me from your simple, serious, solvable presentation was your comment that hope is a verb. I think that is just a great way of phrasing it. So we don't have much time left. Let me just end it on, is there hope despite climate change? And do you have confidence that we as humans can overcome this one?
Yeah, I do hope, right? Hope is a verb, not something that we have, something that we do. And I am optimistic that we may not solve it as fast as we wish we could, but people, when we're faced with difficulties, people rise up and do amazing things. Think about our distant ancestors, faced the Black Death, the bubonic plague, right in the 14th century. A third of humanity died off, and people came back from that. In the 20th century, we fought totalitarianism across two world wars and a Cold War. And we're still here to tell the story. When I was a child, we were worried about nuclear war. We have to do this, and we will do this. And it's going to be good for us. We will wind up better for it, having solved this problem. And I will not give up on that. I'm sticking to the hope. I'm not ready to give up.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we've got for today. Scott, thank you so much for making time for me. For those watching, thank you for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's live stream, don't worry. We will have it available on demand on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. If you have questions about this subject or ideas for future topics we could tackle, please do send a message to us at our Seed World's Facebook page, or feel free to reach out to me directly anytime. Next week, join us again when our editor, Rebecca, is going to be tackling the topic, Preparing for the Future of Weather with Seed Banks. Thank you all for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me.